Welcome to the Transition series of presentations. I am Sheldon Linsenberg. I'm a plastic surgeon with many transitioning clients. As a way of getting to know my clients better, I've explored some cultural topics with a focus on the trans community. There is no larger stage for the transgender initiative than the world of sport and the rights of trans athletes to participate with other athletes of similar gender. This controversy has been discussed in the modern era since shortly after the onset of the modern Olympic Games in 1896. Since the Games began prior to the medical advances of hormonal therapy and sex reassignment surgery, the early issue arose in sporting competitions where it had been alleged that male athletes attempted to compete as women or as transvestites, or that a woman has an intersex condition giving an alleged unfair advantage. To fairly deal with these issues, let us look at the development of official policy regarding competitors by the oversight organizations. After that, we will explain why scientists tell us that there is a male over female advantage in athletics. And finally, I will introduce you to a couple of the true transgender pioneers. The first mandatory sex test by the International Association of Athletics Federations occurred in 1950, prior to the European Championships, though the athletes were tested in their own countries. Testing was held at the 1966 European Championships as an answer to allegations that several Soviet and East German women athletes were actually men. The International Olympic Committee began their own testing at the next Olympic Games in 1968 in Grenoble. Initially, sex verification took the form of physical examinations. It subsequently evolved into chromosome testing and later testosterone testing. It is not always a simple case of checking for XX versus XY chromosomes or sex hormone levels to determine whether an athlete is unambiguously a woman or a man. Fetuses start out as undifferentiated, and the Y chromosome turns on a variety of hormones that differentiate the baby as a male. Sometimes this does not occur, and an individual with two X chromosomes can develop hormonally or phenotypically as a male. Alternately, an individual with an X and a Y can develop hormonally or phenotypically as a female. An ad hoc committee of the IOC Medical Commission met in Stockholm in 2003 to develop consensus on sex reassignment in sports. To summarize their report, individuals undergoing sex reassignment before puberty should be regarded as his or her new gender. Individuals undergoing sex reassignment after puberty should be regarded as his or her new gender under the following conditions. Surgical anatomic changes have been completed no sooner than 2 years after gonadectomy. Legal recognition of the new gender has been conferred by the appropriate clinical authority. Hormonal therapy has been administered in a verifiable manner and for a sufficient time to minimize gender-related advantages. The National Collegiate Athletic Association has a complete policy outlining transgender student-athlete participation in NCAA sports. Colleges not governed by the NCAA may have different policies. The NCAA does not require surgery or legal documents for a trans athlete to participate on a team which matches their identity. A trans male athlete who is not taking testosterone may participate on a men's or a woman's team. When the athlete begins physical transition using hormones, he may compete only on men's teams. A trans female athlete must have 1 full year of hormone treatment prior to competing on a female team. The International Olympic Committee has wrestled with this issue for many years. In 2015, they concluded the overriding sporting objective is and remains the guarantee of fair competition. Rules should be in place for the protection of women in sports because men genetically, hormonally, and developmentally have an athletic advantage. Specific testosterone guidelines were outlined. To avoid discrimination, if not eligible for female competition, the athlete should be eligible to compete in male competition. Furthermore, to guarantee fair competition, to require surgical anatomical changes is not necessary. Those who transition from female to male are eligible to compete in the male category without restriction. Those who transition from male to female are eligible to compete under certain conditions. So why do men have some athletic advantages over women? Ohio University lecturer Chris Schwerian told Runner's World, faster men's times for 100 to 800 meters are mostly due to men on average having greater muscle mass, and a larger portion of it is fast-twitch muscle fibers, which allows them to generate greater force, speed, and anaerobically produced energy. At all distances beyond 800 meters, the main reason for the gap is men's higher aerobic capacity on average, which is due to their typically having less body fat, more hemoglobin and muscle mass, and larger hearts and lungs than women. On average, men have longer and larger bones, which gives them mechanical advantages over women, since they have greater leverage, increased height, and larger frames to support muscle. Their bones are also more dense, and they have tougher ligaments, making them less prone to sports injury. The true measure of a great transgender athlete, in my opinion, is the athlete that has competed on the world stage against competition of their current gender, both before and after gender transition. Without taking anything away from the athletes that are competing in their destination gender, those athletes who train for and win at sports competitions in their natal gender undergo gender transition under the public scrutiny and pressure that accompanies their champion status, and then compete successfully amongst their destination gender, have braved the grittiest and gutsiest journeys. They are deserving of our recognition as true leaders for all transgender athletes. They have opened up the world for all transgender athletes. There are two athletes that immediately come to mind who embody these qualities. Renee Richards and Chris Mosier both began their athletic careers competing in their respective birth gender categories. Each of them transitioned and then continued their athletic careers in their true gender. Richards was born Richard Raskind on August 19, 1934 in New York City, and was raised, as she put it, as a nice Jewish boy in Forest Hills, Queens. Her father was an orthopedic surgeon, and her mother was one of the first female psychiatrists in the United States, in addition to being a professor at Columbia University. Richards attended Horace Mann School and excelled as the wide receiver for the football team, the pitcher for the baseball team, and on the tennis and swim teams. After high school, Richards attended Yale University and was captain of the men's tennis team, and was considered by some to be one of the best college tennis players in the country. He obtained his medical school training there as well. After an internship and residency, Richards joined the United States Navy to continue medical training and played tennis in the Navy. While serving in the Navy, Richards won both the singles and doubles at the All-Navy Championship with a very effective left-hand serve. During college, Richards began dressing as a woman, which at the time was considered to be a perversion, and transsexualism was classified as a form of insanity. Richards named the female alter ego Renee, which is French for reborn. This struggle with sexual identity created sexual confusion, depression, and suicidal tendencies. Richards began seeing Dr. Charles Ihlenfeld, who specialized in endocrinology, transsexualism, and sexual reassignment. Upon seeing Dr. Ihlenfeld, she began getting hormone injections with the long-term hope for a life change. Richards married model Barbara Mole in June 1970, and together they had a son, Nicholas, in 1972. They were divorced in 1975. In the early 70s, Richards resolved to undergo sex reassignment and was referred to surgeon Robert Granado Sr. by Harry Benjamin, successfully transitioning in 1975. After surgery, Richards went to Newport Beach, California, and started working as an ophthalmologist in practice with another doctor. Following Richards' disclosure of her gender reassignment, the United States Tennis Association, the Women's Tennis Association, and the United States Open Committee required all women competitors to verify gender with a bar body test of their chromosomes. Richards applied to play in the U.S. Open in 1976 as a woman, but refused to take the test, and thus was not allowed to compete in the U.S. Open, Wimbledon, or the Italian Open in the summer of 1976. In August 1977, Judge Alfred A. Shoney settled a lawsuit in Richards' favor. He ruled, "This person is now a female," and that requiring Richards to pass the bar body test was grossly unfair, discriminatory, and inequitable, and a violation of her rights. He further ruled that the USTA intentionally discriminated against Richards and granted Richards an injunction against the USTA and the USOC, allowing her to play in the U.S. Open. Richards lost to Virginia Wade in the first round of the singles competition, but made it to the finals in doubles. In 1979, she defeated Nancy Ritchie for the 35 and over singles title at the U.S. Open. She later coached Martina Navratilova to 2 Wimbledon wins and was inducted into the USTA Eastern Tennis Hall of Fame in 2000. In 2014, a wooden racket used by her was donated to the National Museum of American History, which is part of the Smithsonian Institution. 40 years later, we have our first female-to-male achievement of this type. Chris Mosier is an American triathlete who began competing in triathlon in 2009 as female. In 2010, Mosier publicly self-identified as a transgender man in a leading American gay magazine, The Advocate, after competing in his first race as male. In 2011, Mosier was featured in the New York Times prior to competing in the New York City Triathlon, a race he competed in 2 years prior as female. In 2015, he earned a spot on Team USA Sprint Duathlon men's team for the 2016 World Championship, making him the first known out trans athlete to join a U.S. national team different from his gender assigned at birth. While he qualified, Mosier was uncertain about his eligibility to compete in the Duathlon World Championship race in June 2016 due to the International Olympic Committee policy around the participation of transgender athletes. In 2015, Mosier challenged the policy, resulting in the creation and adoption of new IOC guidelines for the participation of transgender athletes. Mosier successfully advocated for change in the policy to allow his participation in the World Championship and future races. Following the policy change, In 2016, Mosier raced in the Sprint Duathlon World Championship race, becoming the first known transgender athlete to compete in the World Championship. In 2016, Mosier was chosen as the first openly transgender athlete to be featured in the body issue of ESPN the magazine. He was also the first transgender athlete to be featured in a Nike advertisement, which debuted during prime time of the Rio Olympics in 2016. The award-winning ad showcases Mosier's courage as a trailblazing, inspirational athlete and role model. This introduction concludes with a quote from Myann Bagger, professional trans women golfer. I'm paraphrasing. The important thing is that the tide is turning. The best we can do is to continue leading by example. I have collected some sayings that I live my life by, and one of them is by Gandhi that states, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." I hope you've enjoyed this introduction and can join us for part 2 of the series on transgender athletes, notable trans male athletes. And for part 3 of this series on transgender athletes, notable trans female athletes. Thank you for listening to this video. Visit my practice website to find out more about my cosmetic surgery practice for transgender and cisgender people.